Today I want to talk a little bit about the parable of the wineskins, which is a parable I've struggled with for years but couldn't get clarity on until recently. And a few weeks ago I was reading in Luke 5 and sent me on a bunny trail of research. And what I came to realize is I don't think the parables are allegorical in nature. They simply teach a principle. Many of the parables are allegorical. For example, the parable of the wheat and the tares. The wheat stands for the sons of the kingdom, the tares, the sons of the evil one. The reapers are angels, the harvest is the end of the age. Many of the parables, however, are not allegorical. They just teach a principle or a moral. For example, the parable of the unforgiving servant. Nobody interprets that allegorically. It just teaches that if you don't forgive others, God won't forgive you. Or the parable of the persistent widow. It just teaches to continue in persistent prayer. Or the parable of the rich fool who tore down his barns, built bigger ones, filled them, and told his soul not to worry. It just means that you shouldn't store up treasure in this life because it's fleeting. So likewise, I think the parable, the garment, the patch and the garment and the wineskins isn't allegorical. It just teaches a simple moral, which we'll get to in a second. Now, the parable has a long allegorical history of interpretation that dates back to Marcion. And Marcion, traditionally, it's said that he went to Rome to introduce his new hermeneutic and argue that the God of the Jews in the Hebrew Scriptures is different than the God of Jesus and the apostles, which was a God of love, and the God of the Jews was the demiurge and an angry, vengeful God, and he was excommunicated over that whole thing. But he argued that the wineskin parable, and along with the saying, you can't make a bad tree produce good fruit, argued that Judaism was the old, Jesus and the apostles were the new, and we should reject the old for the new. Now, the other church fathers interpreted it allegorically, but not so anti-Semitically. They interpreted it as the new is the regeneration of the Spirit. And you can't fast in a way that pleases God without being regenerated by the gift of the Spirit and faith. Now, some of the church fathers that were more anti-Semitic in nature, like Jerome and Cyril of Alexandria, put the caveat in that the Jews couldn't fast in a way that was pleasing to God because they couldn't be regenerated because they were Jews, right? And so the more Marcionite kind of interpretation of the parable crops back up during the time of the Reformation, particularly because of Luther and his hard dichotomy between law and gospel, justification by faith versus justification by works, which he applied to Judaism as a whole, which was inherently legalistic, etc. And he applied to the parable that the old is Judaism, the new is Christianity, and you leave the old for the new, etc. And that interpretation has been prevalent since and is prevalent in most modern commentaries. Now, I would say that there's no allegory to the parables, that they're simply teaching the principle that you can't make his disciples fast while the Messiah is with them. And so he says that right before when he's asked about his disciples not fasting and John's and the Pharisees' disciples fasting. And he says, can you make the wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? But the days are coming when the bridegroom will be taken away. In those days, they will fast. And then he tells the two parables of you can't put a new patch on an old garment, it'll tear away. You can't put new wine in old wineskin, it'll burst. And then in Luke 5, the Lucan version adds a third parable. It says, no one after drinking old wine desires new, for he says the old is better. Now, if the three parables are allegorical, then the third one turns the first two, they contradict each other, because the first two supposedly refer to the old is better than the new, but then the third one refers to vice versa, the new is better than the old. The third one seems to, if it's allegorical, refers to the old is better than the new. And I would say there's no allegory in all three. They just simply teach the principle that it won't work. You can't force a situation against itself. And so you can't make the disciples fast while the Messiah is with them. It won't work. It's like putting a a new patch on an old garment. It won't work. It'll tear away. You can't put new wine in an old wineskin. It won't work. The wineskin will bust. You can't force somebody who knows wine to drink bad wine. He won't do it. It won't work. And so he's simply reinforcing that point, and there's no allegory within the parable. Now, not only is there no allegory, but in two ways he reinforces the traditional Jewish apocalyptic narrative that was understood at the time. By first referring to himself as the bridegroom, which assumes the Jewish apocalyptic tradition that the day of God will come, the Messiah will come, and there'll be what's called the Messianic banquet, in which the righteous will be wed to the Messiah forever in the resurrection and the age to come. And so he makes that reference to the Messianic banquet, and then he makes a reference to the Messianic woes by saying, in those days, the days are coming. The days are coming, which is out of the prophetic literature, for example, Isaiah 39, Jeremiah 7. The days are coming when the valley of Hinnom will become the valley of slaughter, or Amos 9, when the Davidic tabernacle is rebuilt. The days are coming when the reaper will overtake the plowman. And that got projected to its eschatological end and was associated with the Messianic woes. For example, Jesus, when he's asked about the temple, he says, I tell you, the days are coming when not one stone will be left on another. And his disciples ask, when will this be? When will the time of the end and your coming be? And he describes the end of the age and the destruction of the temple. And so he makes both references to the Messianic banquet and the Messianic woes, which reaffirm the traditional Jewish apocalyptic narrative. He wouldn't go on to tell three parables that contradict that narrative. Rather, the three parables simply teach the moral that you can't force his disciples to fast while the Messiah is with them. So hopefully that kind of clears up those parables and gets rid of the allegorical associations that are commonly read back into them.